Elena tugged at the hem of her modest navy dress as she studied her reflection in the cafe bathroom mirror. The overhead lights were too harsh, exposing every shadow under her eyes, every little imperfection she usually ignored when focused on lesson plans and grading papers. She dabbed her lips with a tissue, adjusted her simple silver earrings, and whispered to herself, "It's just coffee." Nothing more. Her friends, if she could still call them that, had insisted this blind date was different. "He's perfect for you, Elle," they'd said, exchanging glances she hadn't bothered to interpret at the time. Their laughter had seemed harmless over the phone, their nudging playful. But now, with her heart thudding uncomfortably in her chest, unease pressed against her ribs like a warning. When she stepped back into the cafe, the warm aroma of espresso and cinnamon did nothing to calm her. The place was buzzing with chatter, couples leaning close over steaming mugs, students hunched over laptops, but her focus went straight to the corner booth. There they were, Mia, Claire, and Tasha. The trio sat with cups in hand, whispering behind manicured fingers, giggles spilling out in little bursts that froze the moment Elena's eyes landed on them. Her seat, a lonely two-top table positioned far too close to their booth, waited like a stage. She walked toward it with a practiced smile that wavered at the edges. The chair scraped against the floor as she sat, her pulse pounding louder than the hiss of the barista's milk frother. Minutes passed. The man she was supposed to meet still hadn't arrived. Her friends kept sneaking glances, trying, and failing, to contain their amusement. Elena realized with a slow, sinking dread that this wasn't matchmaking. This was entertainment, for them. Her cheeks burned. She wrapped her hands around her cup of chamomile tea, though it had already gone lukewarm, using it as a shield to keep herself from trembling. She wanted to stand up, to walk out with dignity, but her body betrayed her, glued to the chair by a mixture of humiliation and defiance. If she left now, they would laugh harder. So she stayed, silent, watching the swirl of people around her, pretending she wasn't the punchline to a cruel little game. Then the bell above the cafe door jingled. A hush seemed to ripple across the room. And Elena's breath caught before she even saw him, because she knew, instinctively, something had shifted. The door to the cafe swung open with a soft chime, and in the swirl of cool evening air that followed, he appeared. At first, Elena thought he was just another customer, someone stopping by for a quick latte before heading home. But as he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations dipped, chairs stilled, even the barista behind the counter slowed her movements as though the room itself recognized him before anyone spoke his name. He wasn't dressed for casual coffee. A tailored charcoal suit molded to his broad shoulders, the silk tie loosened just enough to suggest a man who had been fighting through a long day but hadn't lost his edge. His presence wasn't loud, it was commanding in a quieter, subtler way, like gravity. His gaze swept across the room, sharp but searching, as though he was looking for someone specific. And then his eyes found hers. Elena's heart thudded once, hard. For a moment, she couldn't move, pinned under the weight of that steady, unreadable stare. He walked straight toward her, no hesitation, no confusion, as though this tiny table in the corner had been his destination all along. "Sorry I'm late," he said when he reached her, pulling out the chair opposite hers. His voice was smooth, deep, with the kind of authority that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. But beneath the polished tone was something softer, an edge of apology that made her blink in surprise. Late. He was supposed to be her date. Impossible. She didn't know this man. She had never seen him before in her life. Her friends in the corner stiffened, exchanging frantic whispers. Their laughter died instantly. One of them nearly spilled her cappuccino, eyes wide as though she'd just seen a ghost. Elena could feel their attention burning into her back, but she couldn't look away from the stranger in front of her. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand across the table. His grip, when she placed her palm in his, was warm and steady, firm without being overbearing. He held it just long enough to ground her, to tether her in place, before releasing. She should have asked him who he was, why he was here, if he had the wrong woman. But instead, all she managed was a faint nod, her throat too tight to form words. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with a kind of ease that didn't match the tension knotting in her stomach. "You must be Elena," he added, as though he had known her name long before stepping through that door. Behind her, the trio of so-called friends fell into an uneasy silence. They hadn't planned this. That much was clear. Their smug amusement had dissolved into nervous glances and pressed lips. Whatever game they thought they were playing had slipped completely out of their control. Elena, caught between their scheming and this stranger's unnerving confidence, realized something she hadn't in a long time. For once, she wasn't the smallest person in the room. The balance of power had shifted, and it had shifted in her favor. For the first few minutes, the conversation was tentative. Elena's fingers traced the rim of her teacup as she struggled to find words that wouldn't betray her nervousness. Daniel, on the other hand, was calm, leaning slightly forward, elbows resting lightly on the table, his gaze never leaving hers. It was the kind of attention that demanded honesty, whether she liked it or not. "So, you teach?" he asked softly, almost as if testing the waters. "Yes," she replied, warming to the topic. "Third grade. Most days. It's exhausting, sometimes frustrating, but it's worth it when a student finally understands something they've struggled with for weeks." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, and she felt herself relaxing for the first time that evening. Daniel nodded, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "I admire that," he said quietly. "You invest yourself in things that matter, even when no one's applauding. Most people I meet, they stopped caring a long time ago." Elena raised an eyebrow, curious despite herself. "And you, why do you care?" He hesitated, briefly glancing toward the cafe door as though the world outside might answer for him. Then his eyes returned to hers, and something in his expression softened. "I'm raising my daughter alone. I run a company. Big meetings, endless calls, numbers, strategy, but when I go home, it's quiet. Too quiet. I think I forgot how to hope, how to believe in anything beyond deadlines." The words struck her. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress. Only raw honesty. Elena found herself leaning in, drawn by a warmth she hadn't expected from a man who, by reputation alone, could have been intimidating. "I understand that," she said gently. "Sometimes, you have to find the little sparks of life in between all the chaos. Otherwise, it's easy to forget why you started in the first place." He smiled, a genuine, tired smile that lit his features in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Exactly. And meeting you, I don't even know how to explain it. It's as if someone just reminded me that hope still exists." The cafe's usual hum seemed to fade around them. The people at nearby tables lowered their voices, sensing the shift in energy, while Elena's so-called friends fidgeted uncomfortably, the smug amusement from earlier replaced by something closer to awe. Even the barista paused mid-pour, her eyes flicking toward the table. Minutes felt like hours as Elena and Daniel spoke. They shared stories. Her student's small triumphs, his daughter's stubborn streaks, moments of embarrassment, moments of joy. With every word, every laugh, every shared silence, the invisible wall of the setup crumbled. Elena realized she wasn't being tested, humiliated, or laughed at. She was being seen, truly seen. When she finally allowed herself to glance at her friends, their expressions were a mixture of shock and frustration. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. The joke was no longer on Elena, it was in the realization that Daniel had turned a cruel setup into a genuine connection in the blink of an eye. And somewhere deep inside her, Elena felt a flutter she hadn't felt in years, the fragile, thrilling pulse of possibility. The cafe had gone completely still. Elena's friends, who had orchestrated the cruel setup, now looked frozen in disbelief, as though the floor had vanished beneath their feet. Whispers died mid-word, and the usual clatter of cups and silverware seemed muted, replaced by a charged silence that hung between Elena and Daniel like electricity. "Daniel, you don't get it," one of them finally stammered, her voice sharp, almost panicked. "She's not your type. This was just for fun." Daniel's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he looked like the powerful CEO the city whispered about in boardrooms, unshakable, commanding, and impossible to intimidate. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his attention to Elena. The world narrowed to just the two of them. "Set her up as a joke," he said, his voice low, controlled, and cutting. "The only joke here is how blind you've all been." Before anyone could react, he moved with a fluid grace that left Elena breathless. One knee touched the floor, a gesture both humble and commanding, He took her hand gently, holding it as though it were the most precious thing in the room. "Elena," he began, voice trembling ever so slightly, "I don't care that we met 5 minutes ago. I don't care about appearances, or timing, or how ridiculous this must look to everyone else. I know sincerity when I see it, and I know I don't want to waste another second chasing what isn't real." The room was frozen. A barista stopped mid-pour, a couple at a nearby table leaned forward, and Elena's friends could do nothing but gape. Phones had quietly come out to capture the impossible moment, but for Elena, all she could hear was the thrum of her own heartbeat. I want you to be in my life. For my daughter, for me. Will you be mine?" His words were simple, raw, and filled with unflinching honesty. Elena's throat tightened. Her mind spun. Part disbelief, part shock, part something else entirely. She looked down at his hand, the strength of it, the steadiness. She looked at his eyes, filled with hope and vulnerability. And in that suspended second, she realized, this wasn't about the setup, the humiliation, or the jokes. This was about something real, something breathtakingly, impossibly real. Tears threatened to spill, and her lips quivered as she whispered, barely audibly, "Yes." The cafe erupted, not in laughter, but in murmurs of astonishment and applause. Phones snapped pictures, some patrons cheered softly, and Elena's friends shrank back, realizing their prank had turned into a fairy tale before their very eyes. Daniel rose, still holding her hand, and for a brief moment, everything felt suspended, the warm glow of the cafe lights. The quiet hum of the city outside, the scent of coffee and pastries, all woven together into a moment that neither of them would ever forget. For Elena, the sting of humiliation had vanished, replaced by a heady, unshakable certainty. Life could surprise you in the most extraordinary ways. And this was just the beginning.